Well, yeah, I don't know what the fuck Ukraine looks like.
Yeah, exactly.
You could show me any kindergarten with a flame on it, and I'd be like, oh, wow.
Oh no, the kindergarten is on fire.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome to Pact. So normally we tell a little story about our week, but just in terms of what we have in this episode, it's not tonally as appropriate.
Yeah, that's true. We're going to be talking to Caleb Maupin about the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the line that anti-imperialists need to be holding across the globe.
And you may feel like everybody around you thinks that you're wrong, but I think Caleb brings the information and the optimism into this, frankly, difficult topic.
Yeah, and important caveats. War is bad.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody here likes war.
This one might be more controversial for the online leftist audience, but Nazis are bad too.
And
automatically
bad.
Not low-income Trump supporters in rural America. Actual fucking Nazis.
Yeah, people who say that they're concerned for the lives of blonde-haired, blue-eyed European children on BBC.
It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed. Children being killed every day with Putin's missiles and his helicopters and his rockets.
And so, of course, I understand and respect the emotion. What you are outlining there is this tension between longer-term efforts to apply pressure to Vladimir Putin, such as financial sanctions, and the very immediate military threat which you're experiencing.
Yeah, so Nazis are bad. War is bad. Newly developed communist republics, good. And deserving of protection, and autonomy, and sovereignty. So,
tighten your buttholes. It's time for Pact. I'm the P. Peter Coffin. The lovely Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor right here is the ACD. Together we are Pact. Don't miss an episode. Like, comment, and subscribe. Leave us a glowing review on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever weird thing you listen to podcasts on. We are a 5-star podcast.
You know, it's interesting. Since the various call-ins, we have gotten up to 4.8.
Yeah. We have 50 ratings now, which good job.
But that is
admirable.
That is not 5.
Yeah, mission is not accomplished.
Mission is not accomplished. We are not a 3-star podcast. We are not a 4-star podcast. We are not a 4.8 even. We're not a 4.8. We're a 5-star podcast.
Join our Discord. We hang out there all the time, chat, do some other fun stuff that you can access by becoming a patron, like movie night. We also have been distributing stickers and cards for free. That is an ongoing project. There's also exclusive content you can see before anyone else. So help us keep the lights on by becoming a patron at patreon.com/PactPod. That's PACDPOD. We've also got really great Pact merch available at our website, pactpod.com. Finally, tell your friends we rely so big on word of mouth. We stream 7 p.m. Eastern every Sunday, except for when we've got interviews like this one. Thank you so much for tuning in.
So we are very lucky and blessed to have Caleb Maupin with us to talk about the current conflict in Russia and Ukraine. But before we get into any of that.
So we took some time to collect some tweets about this event going on that we wanted to basically run by you and get your reaction. Would you be up for that?
Sure. We have.
It's a fun list.
Yeah.
These are real tweets that we've gathered over the course of the last week that we just think are incredibly unhinged on the subject of Ukraine. And I'm going to start off with one that just left us our mouths agape. I feel like I am watching George Floyd die again, only the country version. We all stand around knowing this is wrong, but are helpless to stop it. What can we do? Hashtag Ukraine is George Floyd.
Wow.
Yeah, that's when I saw that, I was just like, I can't believe that a person thought of that.
Another is give Ukraine their land back Hashtag land back.
We thought you'd be particularly interested in that one.
Oh, did you see this one? I feel like this one really made the rounds. This isn't discussed much, but Putin very much benefits from white privilege. I just can't see a scenario in which a black or brown man running Russia would be allowed to invade Ukraine with no devastating consequences.
I don't even know where to begin with that. That is, yeah. I mean, I guess this goes to show you how much the woke current is a pro-imperialist current. And that this illusion that these people and that this current, I don't know what you want to call it, wokeness, postmodern stuff, that the idea that that's part of the anti-imperialist Marxist movement, that we should try to accommodate it, that we should really, make it part of what our movement is about, and really kind of, help bring these people into the Marxist movement and stuff. I mean, this goes to show you how much of a failed strategy that is.
Yeah, talking about the important protection necessitated for the neo-Nazis among the Ukrainian people. I think that's really important for our multiracial international proletariat to really support.
Calling Ukrainians Nazis is akin to calling black people a racial slur, said Terrell Germain Starr.
That's another one.
Well, I got to tell you, I was thinking about this kind of thing long before stuff with Russia escalated. For years, I was a communist activist in Cleveland, and I would sell communist newspapers on the street. And in Cleveland, especially Parma, which is a suburb of Cleveland, there are a huge amount of Ukrainian folks. And a lot of them are Ukrainian nationalists who fled the USSR and moved to Cleveland. And what's interesting is that, the Ukrainian diaspora is largely more nationalistic and right-wing than in Ukraine itself. And long before anyone was talking about Crimea or anything like that, I would encounter these people on the street. And they would say, oh, my God, communists are evil. Communists are controlled by the Jews. Communism, killed more people, and the Holocaust was made up. It was a fiction invented to justify what the communists did to you. I mean, these people were neo-Nazis. And what was weird is...
And you agreed with them because you're anti-Semitic.
Right, yeah. And I mean, you would talk to these people. They were straight up Nazis. And I met them over and over and over again. I would meet them. And they were not, they had no apologies about it. And what was weird was that, if an average American person who's not from like a special ethnic community was walking around Cleveland or Pittsburgh or one of these cities, Chicago, and was saying stuff like that, everyone would be like, you're a Nazi, you're a white supremacist, you're a scary anti-Semite, go away. But there was this weird, especially at my college, there was this feeling, well, they lived under communism, and communism is just so bad. You have to understand, Caleb, that communism is just so evil that it makes sense these people would want to be Nazis. You got to sympathize with them.
It's like communism has a special property to it that is somehow, maybe not necessarily if you asked them, they'd say it's worse than Nazism, but in their minds, it triggers something where it makes Nazism okay.
Yeah. And I mean, with the Ukrainian community, it is especially, exaggerated because of Stepan Bandera, the Nazi collaborator who's been made a hero by Ukrainian nationalists because of this.
They had stamps of him.
Yeah. And because of this allegation that a famine that took place that was very awful was somehow an intentional genocide of Ukrainian people, that's not what happened. Yeah. And because of that, with Ukrainians, it's particularly exaggerated. But you see this with Hungarians. You see this with some of the Polish anti-communist folks. There is this weird feeling that the Nazis weren't so bad, and American media gives them a pass. And the American society gives them a pass simply because, well, communism's bad, Russia's bad. And I find it particularly shocking from the woke left that thinks everyone's a Nazi. Everyone's a Nazi, by the way. You're a Nazi, I'm a Nazi. Every Trump voter is a Nazi. But actual Nazis in Ukraine who wear this like lightning bolt Nazi symbol, tear down World War II memorials, have torchlit marches for Nazi collaborators, right? Go around beating up Jews. They're just, Putin's bad or something. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, a good friend of mine, Alex Rubinstein, has highlighted how there's an anti-Semitic themed restaurant in Kiev right now. I mean, you can read about this. There's a whole restaurant, and it is built on the ruins of a synagogue, and it is people dressed in like Orthodox Jewish costumes, and it is an anti-Semitic themed restaurant where they like don't have a menu and you have to like haggle for your food, and it is like a whole
Oh my God.
Wow.
anti-Semitism, anti-Russian feelings, anti-Roma people. I mean, it's been given just a pass by these people that are woke because they take their directions from CNN. I mean, it's shocking to me.
I feel like this is a good time to bring up that official who was interviewed on the BBC recently. You were actually the one who posted that clip that I saw it from. The gentleman who said that they were sad that blonde-haired, blue-eyed European children were under attack. And it's like, you said that on BBC. Like, you'd think that they'd have the sense not to say something like that if they don't want to be seen as neo-Nazis on like the world stage. But then the guy is just like, let's get past that.
Yeah, the BBC guy has no fucking idea how to respond. He's like, oh shit.
Yeah. I mean, it is just utterly shocking to me. And I mean, they've just been beating this drum of fascists are everywhere, and it's like it's right in front of your face. I mean, they make no bones about it, and we're just, all these woke people just go along with it. I mean, it's really frustrating to see, and it shows you how manufactured a lot of this discourse is. Because if these people actually had concerns, they would at the very least be neutral in the conflict that's happening right now. At the very least. But they're not, and it's important to talk about this in regards to January 6th, because, Joe Biden, in his speech, that he made, his first State of the Union, he tried to link January 6th with Russia and China. He talked about insurrection and autocracy. But that crowd on January 6th, that was all of these right-wing extremist groups that the U.S. government has cultivated around the world. It's not just right-wing Ukrainians. It's the right-wing Miami Cubans. It's the Shahs of Sunset Park, the Pahlavi monarchists who fled Iran after the 1979 revolution. It's the Falun Gong, the Epoch Times, the anti-China fanatical religious cult that's been around.
Weren't there some Moonies there?
Oh, yes. Sean Moon, Reverend Sun Myung Moon's son, was walking around the crowd. This is the guy who has the weird ceremony where they bless the AK rifles. And the United States government has this policy of going around the world cultivating these extremist groups, these terrorist groups, these hate groups, these counter gangs is the word that the British intelligence officer Frank Kitson described them as. And we've gone around the world cultivating these groups. And then, Donald Trump basically built a rainbow coalition of these groups, right? I mean, from all around the world, who all have their short-term vendetta, and they don't really care about the overall interest of U.S. imperialism, right? They're not thinking about like, how can we make sure the USA, dominates the world. These Miami Cubans, they just want to overthrow Castro. They don't care, right? The Iranians, they just want to escalate with Iran. They don't care, right? And so the USA has kind of cultivated these groups. Donald Trump kind of, found them all and made like a coalition of them, and then they stormed the Capitol on January 6th, and we saw the crowd was full of those folks. I mean, every one of these groups that you can think of was there, and that's who these woke folks are upset about, right? I mean, that's the Donald Trump movement is dominated by these folks, and if they're worried about Donald Trump, a lot of his base is these extremist groups, and that includes the Azov Battalion. Barack Obama would not send lethal weapons to Ukraine because he knew about, there was some feeling that, okay, there are these extremist groups. Barack Obama was very anti-Russian, and he carried out that coup and destabilized the country, and we can get into that. But Obama wouldn't send lethal aid to Ukraine. Donald Trump did. He did send lethal weapons to Ukraine. So it just shows that they are building these extremist groups around the world, and these extremist groups are very right-wing. And if you're going to be a woke supporter of U.S. imperialism, you just kind of have to turn a blind eye to it. It's really bizarre, and it's an important part of what's happening in the United States right now. That, when Donald Trump says America first, that hits home with a lot of people in the Rust Belt because they kind of notice that our government has a different agenda than than the interests of the country, and that there is a feeling that our government is loyal to somebody else that has a more global agenda than it is to average working families in the United States. Now, we understand that in a Marxist terms, but they understand it maybe in vague nationalistic right-wing terms. But they're catching on to a real trend, which is that fighting for the Azov Battalion, fighting for the Miami Cubans, fighting for the Falun Gong seems to be more important than our leaders than making sure Americans can have clean drinking water and not have lead in their water.
I feel like it's funny what you described there was basically Donald Trump doing identity politics with the right wing. Like it's the exact same thing with the exact same avoidance of any kind of class program in which everybody's specific grievance has to be addressed. And because they all have these just minorly interlocking grievances with certain people, they're able to direct all of them at one thing, but they all have a different agenda.
Yeah, and that's the situation here. And I mean, you can compare it to the Roman Empire. You can compare it to different empires throughout history, where holding together a vast empire can be very difficult. And at home things get worse and worse and worse. And this is empire in decline. We've seen it many times.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because we see a lot of people not have any idea what imperialism is as they're criticizing this event from whatever side they're coming from. There's a lot of people who are claimed to be communists, Marxist Leninists even, who just have no idea what imperialism is. People who are talking about it as though it is. If Russia does a thing that's even vaguely aggressive, that's imperialism because it's a bigger country doing it to a smaller country. And it's like, why are you calling yourself a Marxist-Leninist? Like Lenin, the keystone of what he contributed was a scientific analysis of imperialism.
Yeah, and Ukraine is not an independent country. It is very much a colony of the United States and of the European Union.
Exactly.
The Ukrainian government doesn't seem to have the sovereignty. I mean, Zelensky, their current president, took power on a platform of bringing the country back together. He was going to implement the Minsk agreements. He was going to de-escalate everything. That's who the Ukrainian people voted for. They voted for this guy who wasn't one of the extremists who toppled the government in 2014 with the support of the United States. They voted for a moderate. And he came in and he was going to fix things, but they wouldn't let him. The military leaders that the United States installed that are, ultra nationalists wouldn't let him. The European Union folks and the advisors and others, they just wouldn't let him do that. And I think Zelensky is in a situation where he's tried to be the guy who will bring the country back together, and he wasn't able to do it. He wasn't allowed to do it by the forces that really control Ukraine. When people make this about, little independent sovereign Ukraine is fighting big, powerful Russia. No, Ukraine has been basically colonized. I mean, is a colony of U.S. imperialism that has been basically pushed into a confrontation with Russia at their expense. I mean, look, if you really love the Ukrainian people, you should hate what NATO has done to them. They have nudged them, pushed them into this confrontation with a very powerful country, and now they're sitting back and watching them get killed, and they're then saying, "Oh, look, see, Russia's so bad," and they're using them for propaganda. It's sickening. It's really, really sickening.
And while we're on that topic, Caleb, if you wouldn't mind just giving the audience a historical overview of what has led up to this current conflict and how you see the details of what's happening now.
Sure. Well, after the fall of the Soviet Union, things got really bad in that whole region. The restoration of capitalism, the economic dismantling of socialism caused a huge drop in life expectancy. Millions of people died. And it was bad in Russia, and it was particularly bad in Ukraine. Excuse me. In Ukraine, for example, there were cities that only had electricity for like 4 or 5 hours a day.
So like 100% renewable energy.
Women were sex trafficked, a huge rise in organized crime. And, it was a devastating period. And, out of the fall of the Soviet Union, a treaty was basically signed that Ukraine is a country that has many different ethnic groups in it and many different peoples with different feelings about who they are. And the borders of Ukraine are not very clear, as Putin talked about, right? I mean, under the Russian Empire, under the Tsar, there was no Ukraine. There was just a part of the Tsarist Empire they called Ukraine that had kind of its own language, and people there had their own customs, and they were considered Ukrainian, and that was part of the empire. But when Lenin came to power and when the Bolsheviks came to power, they were really into the right of nationalities to their own territory, self-determination, their own language. And then during the Russian Civil War, Lenin added more territory to what is considered Ukraine. Stalin added some more territory to it. And then after Stalin died, Khrushchev, he added, Crimea to Ukraine. Crimea had been considered part of Russia. And it was, they were all part of the Soviet Union. So it would be like Florida's borders changing or Ohio's borders changing. We're all part of the United States. It's just kind of a reshuffling of what district gets what. But after the Soviet Union fell, that all got messy and confusing. So a treaty was signed that basically said that this is what Ukraine's borders are going to be. Ukraine's going to give up its nuclear weapons and give them to Russia. Crimea will remain part of Ukraine, but Russia will get to keep their big, huge military base there. And the people in the eastern regions who are Russian speaking and sympathize with Russia, they'll get representation in the government. The people in the western regions that consider themselves to be more like the European Union countries and are somewhat hostile to Russia, they will get representation in the government. And that's how it'll move forward. And that was a good arrangement, right? And you had various Ukrainian leaders who came in. Some leaned closer to the United States, some leaned closer to Russia. But overall, it was kind of, this agreement that, it was kind of a compromise. And that was how it worked. And then in 2014, they had a president, Yanukovych, who was basically, he was kind of facing a decision. Should I make a financial deal with Russia or should I make a financial deal with the European Union? And it looked like he was starting to lean toward making a financial deal with Russia. So the United States fomented this movement called Euromaidan that involved a lot of these far-right Nazi extremist groups in the West that really hate Russia, that have a narrative where the Nazis were right in World War II. And they protested and they occupied Maidan Square, and Victoria Nuland, who was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, was supporting them and directing them. And they overthrew the Ukrainian government, and the elected president, Yanukovych, was toppled. And what's amazing was they actually leaked a phone call, that was, there was a phone call that was recorded that got leaked where the U.S. ambassador, Victoria Nuland, picked the new president. She actually picked who would be the president. She's on the phone. She's like, I like Yats. She actually picked who the new president would be after this color revolution in 2014. That's how blatant it was, an act of the United States picking the new government. So in 2014, this fanatically anti-Russian government takes power in Kiev. The people in the western parts of the country who speak Russian as their language, who basically feel the fall of the Soviet Union was a bad thing, that vote for the Communist Party, that's the party they vote for, they got quite upset about that. And, Crimea, this peninsula where there's the only thing there is this huge Russian military base, and everyone who lives there, does business with the Russian military base or something. They got very worried because, that Russian military base, if it left, they would all lose their jobs and lose everything. So they voted to join with Russia, and they became part of Russia. And the people in the eastern regions, seeing that their language was being outlawed, they were outlawing the teaching of the Russian language in schools, and seeing that World War II memorials were being torn down, they declared independence from Ukraine, and they declared the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic. And this is the Donbass region.
Very high voting ratio, too. Like, if you look into the results of that, it was all near unanimous.
There's a large discrepancy between what Ukraine says and what their own republics say in terms of the voter turnout.
If you want to listen to Donbass voices, you really gotta.
Yeah, I mean, there's a country with a lot of different ethnic groups and a lot of different, feelings. And one group that is very extreme and opposed to the other group is like somehow forced into power. Then that other group would be like, okay, we're leaving. And they would vote to basically have independence. So in response to that, Russia did not recognize the Lugansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic. Russia, they did recognize Crimea, and Crimea joined with Russia. But Russia waited, and they said, no, we want there to be negotiations. And so in 2015, like a year after this coup, they had the Minsk agreement where the Ukrainian government and the people in Donetsk and Lugansk, they met and they reached an agreement in 2015, which was that tensions would gradually de-escalate. They would gradually begin the process of reintegrating these people in the eastern regions back into the government. They would legalize their political parties like the Communist Party and the Party of Regions. They would allow the speaking of the Russian language in schools, and that this was all going to de-escalate. And that was the idea. And that's what Russia wanted. Russia was not recognizing them then. And Russia was not trying to make them part of Russia or make them not part of Ukraine anymore. Russia was very happy about the Minsk agreement. But the Minsk agreement was not implemented. And since 2014, these areas that declared independence have been shelled. They have been, bombed. They've been using drones and been carrying out drone strikes against the people there. They've implemented a food blockade, so they can't import food from anywhere except Russia, basically. So they're buying all their food from Russia because no food can go to the eastern regions. The Ukrainian military has continued to attack these regions. And the death count is about 14,000. 14,000 people have been killed over the course of the last 8 years in these eastern regions. They actually have a memorial to all the children, all the people under the age of 18 who have died. And I keep tweeting out the picture of this memorial because it's like, we're hearing about Ukrainians who are suffering right now. Well, what about the people who've been suffering for 8 years with this relentless bombing and attack these people in the eastern regions have endured? So for 8 years, Russia keeps saying implement the Minsk agreement, and the Ukrainian government doesn't do it. They don't implement the Minsk agreement. Fast forward to about a month ago, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, American officials start saying, Russia's about to invade Ukraine. And Russia's like, no, we're not. And then they're like, no, Russia's about to invade Ukraine. And Russia's like, we really aren't going to invade Ukraine. And they're like, no, Russia, you're having military exercises in Belarus. And they're like, we do that every year. We told you about this. Like, what's going on here? And they're like, no. The USA just starts beating the drum. Russia is going to invade Ukraine. And Russia's like, okay. Russia actually starts moving troops away from the border, saying, look, we're not going to invade Ukraine. And just to reassure you, we're going to move our troops away from the border so that you don't think we're going to invade Ukraine. And so as soon as Russia starts moving its troops away from the border, then all of a sudden bombs started going off. Bombs started going off in Lugansk. Bombs started going off in Donetsk. All the shelling, where they're firing mortars and all that just started, piling in. And it was really clear what the United States was doing. They were faking out the world so they could set the stage for, an effort to just take out Lugansk and Donetsk. They've been waiting all this time. And the idea was that Russia would be so intimidated by these, these allegations that, they're about to invade Ukraine, that when this offensive happened, they wouldn't be able to move in and stop these people from being slaughtered. Well, Russia said, no, we are going to move in and protect these people. So first, Putin recognized the governments of Lugansk and Donetsk. He said, you guys have been asking for our recognition for 8 years. Well, we recognize you as countries. And he was immediately joined by all the communist world, practically. Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, Iran recognized them. The Houthi revolutionaries in Yemen recognized them. North Korea has recognized them.
Yeah, but they're all bad.
Right. As recognized the people's republics. And then because these governments that they now recognize are asking for their protection, Russia moved its military in to protect the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic. And as, the Ukrainian military continued to attack them, Russia then moved its forces into the rest of Ukraine to take out the Ukrainian military and say, you're not going to attack these people. And so Russia is now engaged in, they call it an anti-Nazi operation. They're basically taking out they have this extremist Nazi division of the Ukrainian military called the Azov Battalion, 125,000 fighters that march into battle with Nazi uniforms. They're dismantling the Ukrainian military. And they are actually striking with quite a bit of precision. They are making a point of only striking military targets. And I have, there's somebody in the Center for Political Innovation who is Ukrainian, and he's talked about how it is amazing how precise the Russian military is striking, how they are going out of their way to avoid targeting civilian areas, how the Azov Battalion and these extremist forces are now setting up their rocket launchers in communities because they know Russia won't strike neighborhoods where people live. It's shocking. And this Ukrainian military that, they were forced to buy all this military equipment from NATO. They've spent billions of dollars buying all this military equipment from NATO. It's all been blown to bits. It's all been blown to shreds. The Russian military is very, very effective. They know what they're doing, and Russia is moving in. And Russia is saying, we will move out of Ukraine if you can give up all these U.S. weapons that you've been piling into the country, number one. And number two, if you can leave Lugansk and Donetsk alone. That's all they want. If they will agree to give up the huge amount of weapons and the possibility they might join NATO, the U.S. military alliance, And if they will leave Donetsk and Lugansk alone and just recognize these people, I guess you're not going to implement the Minsk agreement and let them be part of your country. So let them have their own country. Then Russia will move out. This is not an invasion in the sense that like Russia is not trying to like set up a colony in Ukraine. That's not what they want to do, right? They simply want to make sure that the killing of these people in these two regions stops. They want to stop that killing, number one. And they want to make sure that this government that has been installed by the United States on their border doesn't continue to escalate, the threats against them, right? Because the talk that they might get nuclear weapons, the talk that they might join the NATO alliance and start having huge military bases there. Russia doesn't want that on their border. The way Russia is acting, again, it's awful. People are dying. People are suffering, and I recognize that, and I'm not celebrating that fact. But the reality is, Russia has waited 8 years. I hate to make this analogy, but every time Israel goes into Gaza, right? Israel will get hit with like 3 rockets, and then they'll go into Gaza and they'll just slaughter hundreds of people. And their response will be, well, Israel has the right to defend itself. And it'll be like 3 Israelis got killed, maybe 2 Israelis got killed. Well, this situation has gone on for 8 years in Donetsk and Lugansk. And it's not 1 or 2 people that have gotten killed. It's 14,000 people that have gotten killed. And Russia has waited and waited and waited 7 years for this agreement to be implemented. It's not happening. And so finally, after 7 years, after 14,000 dead, Russia is saying, okay, this is going to stop. And we're going to go in and we're going to dismantle your military. And we're going to make sure that these people on the eastern regions who we wanted to be part of Ukraine, we didn't want them to be independent. We wanted them to be part of Ukraine. You really are not going to let them be part of Ukraine. Now we're going to protect them and you're not going to slaughter them anymore. And I don't think Russia is in the wrong in doing this. I think that they are correct. That's not to say that there aren't atrocities in war, right? And that's not to say that there aren't innocent people who've been hurt, right? I don't deny that. But overall, Russia is right and the Ukrainian government is wrong. And that's just, if you're an honest anti-imperialist, you have to look at it this way. And the world communist movement gets this. The communists all over the world are honoring Donetsk and Lugansk. It's only like Western hipster liberals who don't get this. It's kind of shocking to me to see how much distance there is between the world communist movement and American hipster liberals who think they're communists. It's shocking to me.
Just to put it in perspective, the 14,000 deaths are in these tiny little regions.
Right.
Like we like to measure things in the United States based on how many 9/11s they were. And that was 3,000 people that died in a nation of 330 plus million people. This is a tiny region, and they've had almost 5 times as many deaths.
Yeah.
So for 8 years, the Donbass region has been under attack by the Ukrainian military. And so what was it a month ago that sort of triggered this special operation for denazification of the Ukrainian military? Like, what was the breaking point?
Well, okay, so you have to understand the chain of events, which is first, the United States and the British and other EU countries started making all this noise that Russia was about to invade Ukraine. And that was setting the stage, we now know, for what happened, which is, I believe it was, 2 Fridays ago, the bombings and attacks that they've gotten suddenly escalated. And people in those regions started getting on buses and fleeing for their lives because they knew what was happening. But it's also important to note that there are other factors. One being that Ukraine has said that they want to join the NATO coalition. And NATO is formed to, stop the spread of communism in Western Europe. It's an anti-communist Cold War relic, basically. And the way it works is that, if any NATO country is attacked, all of them immediately get involved. And when the Soviet Union fell, Russia was promised that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. That's what James Baker told Gorbachev. And that's what the German foreign ministry also said when Germany, became reunified. They said NATO would not move 1 inch eastward from Germany. And that isn't what has happened. A number of countries have joined NATO since then. And NATO has expanded and it's expanded right up to Russia's borders. And so the USA starts piling weapons into there. And now the government of Ukraine, this fanatically anti-Russian government, says, oh, well, we would like to join NATO. And Russia is like, wait a second, you're already a government, of extremists who hate us. And then there's also been talk of, Ukraine said, we gave up the nuclear weapons the Soviet Union had that were in Ukraine. We gave them up at the end of the Cold War. But who says that we have to not have nuclear weapons? They're talking about getting nuclear weapons. Can you imagine this? This fanatically anti-Russian government right on their border. They're not only talking about joining the U.S. NATO alliance and hosting U.S. troops and military bases. They're announcing they might be considering getting nuclear weapons. So Russia's already kind of upset about that. Plus, you have the ongoing slaughter of the people in these eastern regions. All of this leads to a situation where Russia sees this onslaught coming to the people in the eastern region. They say, no, this stops today. This stops. This ends. We're moving in. And that's what's going on. And they have said over and over again, they don't want to occupy. Russia's got their own problems, okay? They've got problems with drug dealers. They've got terrorists that operate in the Muslim regions of the country. They've got their own problems. They don't want to occupy Ukraine. This is not like they sat there and they want Ukraine to be part of Russia. This is not territorial expansionism by any means.
Wait. Joe Biden said Vladimir Putin is trying to reestablish the Soviet Union. You're telling me that's not correct?
That is not correct.
I just wanted to summarize for our audience the things leading up to these events. It's the combination of the escalation of what was happening in the Donbass region over the past 8 years, with NATO influence intertwined in that and coinciding alongside the Western countries generating this media narrative preceding that this was going to happen, coercing Russia into a situation where that has to happen in protection of the Donbass region.
Yeah. When we're talking about this denazification, whenever I bring up the fact that the Azov battalion, this neo-Nazi paramilitary group, has been officially integrated into the Ukrainian National Guard. People say things like, well, that's like 1,000 people. That's just 1,000 people. It's not like, it's like, well, all right. So you're telling me somebody outwardly identifying as a neo-Nazi, let's officially integrate them into the United States government somewhere. That's not the only thing you talk about for an entire year.
Right. Yeah, it's not only 1,000 people. I believe it's 125,000 is a number that I've heard.
Yeah. I mean,
frankly, if you're going to have an organization that is friendly to neo-Nazis, it doesn't matter if you identify as a neo-Nazi organization or not.
Well, yeah, and then they lose their fucking minds when some Republican who doesn't support, I don't know, abortion or something, they're a Nazi in effect.
Yeah, they're a Nazi because they have the wrong tick in the wrong box on one thing. And you Caleb, brought up this. I had no idea about this anti-Semitic restaurant you're talking about. That just because that's not the Azov battalion. That is a restaurant. It's an institution that is
embedded in the culture.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
reflective of it.
Exactly.
And reflective of the superstructure emerging in Ukraine.
Exactly. And then further beyond that, you can't have a communist party in the country. So like a lot of people like to say, well, it's not representative of the country. It's like, I just don't get it.
In the United States, there are a lot of immigrants from Latin America. There are a lot of people who are from a Latino or Chicano background. Imagine if you had a governor, a right-wing Republican governor in Texas or Arizona or New Mexico or something like that, and he started fining people and giving people tickets and taking them to court for speaking Spanish. Do you think that would be tolerated here? Do you think that would be accepted?
No.
Yeah, that's what the Ukrainian government is doing to Russian speakers. How can people not see this? It's
there's some element of the cynicism and there's some element of the naivety. I think they're two they sound like polar opposite things, but they're landing in the exact same place, and it's just bizarre.
It shows you how much U.S. imperialism dominates and controls these woke circles. That's who runs this. Wokeism serves imperialism. And that's blatantly clear. But as much as we were focusing on the negative here, it's kind of like, it's like, I think, what is it? One of those comedians, he said something like, when he got divorced, everyone said to him like, oh, that was so sad. And he said, actually, no, it was really sad for a long time. And now things have kind of gotten better because we finally got divorced. It's like, that's kind of how you can look at this situation, right? That, yes, this is bad, but it's been bad for a long time. And what's happening here is Russia is putting an end to it. And in a way, there's something kind of optimistic about this, because, for example, the SWIFT system, right? That was the threat that Biden and all of them made. Well, if Russia does this, we're going to kick them out of the banking system. There will be no banking transactions between Russia and any Western capitalist country. Basically.
Yeah, but imperialism is when a country does a bad thing with weapons. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with the banking system. Why are you paying attention to that?
Right. But it's
sorry, I just had to say that. I'm so tired
of the threat that we will just completely throw Russia out of the banking system if this escalates, right? Well, Biden came out recently, and they asked him at his press conference, are you going to throw Russia out of the banking system? And you got this, well, no, we can't. Because you can't do that. That would crash the international economy, right? And it's hilarious because yesterday they did announce, I saw headlines, different places, Russia kicked out of the SWIFT banking system. They're not kicked out of the SWIFT banking system. A bunch of top Russian banks are, but you can't kick Russia out of the SWIFT banking system because they're an important part of the world economy. And a lot of top Russian banks are, so they're going to have to open new banks, and it's going to be a headache, right? But they can't kick Russia out of the SWIFT banking system because it would crash the economy. And, the USA is not willing to send troops to Ukraine, right? The USA is realizing, in theory, if this had happened in the 90s, the United States would just roll in there, but they can't do that. And that at the end of the day, the world is changing. And, Russia and China and their allies like Venezuela and Cuba and Iran, they're getting stronger. And that as much as the United States can beat its chest, I know they've outlawed the TV network that I work at in the European Union. All the EU countries just banned RT, but at the end of the day, they can't really do that much to stop this. They can't do that much to stop Russia from doing this because at the end of the day, imperialism is being weakened and the anti-imperialist countries are much stronger than they used to be. And they thought basically they'd be able to fake out Russia and then just slaughter the people in the eastern regions and have this Ukraine, regime that they installed be solidified and powerful. That's not happening. In reality, this is a sign of how weak U.S. imperialism really is and how strong the anti-imperialist countries are. And that we've got two new communist countries, right? I mean, that's what we should be happy about. There are two countries in the eastern regions that are run by communists that, it used to be nobody recognized them. Now, a lot of countries around the world are recognizing them. And they're led by communist parties, and they're people that are very proud of their heritage and proud of the defeat of the Nazis in World War II. And we have two new communist governments that have basically been set up and recognized in the eastern regions. As bad as this situation is, it's a moment to realize that the forces of right in the world, the forces that are against the imperialists, are stronger than ever. And we should recognize the world is changing. We're heading toward a multipolar world. The world is not going to be centered around the United States and Western Europe forever, right? And that we are seeing imperialism being rolled back, more so than it has ever been since the Cold War, at least. And that's something to be happy about.
No, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. That's 100%.
You've given us an extraordinarily awesome account of the history leading up to this and what's actually going on. I want to talk a little bit about and end on how this contrasts with what Western American media is saying about what's happening and how it so aggressively pervades the ideology of just like regular everyday people in the United States. I have a friend, he's a smart guy, not super politically involved, but, very, very left-leaning, not a communist, but, the kind of like, I'll get him the communism someday. It's like a meme. And he's sending me all this stuff saying like what he thinks is happening and like Russia is invading Ukraine. Like, look at this footage. Look at this kindergarten that's being bombed. Like, I don't want to believe it, but this is what I'm seeing. And this is happening and this is real. How do we antagonize or fight against the mainstream messaging of American and Western media? And how do we carry this message to other people who are just, directly like anybody else, subject to the ideology that's being disseminated to them as part of the Western world?
I guess let me just put it this way, right? That they have the media megaphone. They've got Fox and CNN and MSNBC, and they've got control of the algorithms, and we are in the center of the empire, and they have a way bigger megaphone than we have. However, a lot of American working people are angry about their conditions they're facing right now. They're angry about the lower living standards. They're angry about, the lack of economic opportunity, the opioid epidemic, the prison industrial complex. And what we need to do is we need to hold the line, because when people are suffering, when people are angry at the government and at the ruling class, the last thing they ever want to get behind is somebody who looks like a coward, who's somebody who's going to go, oh, well, and I'm seeing that. That's what I'm seeing from a lot of even tankies right now. They just, in response to this, they're going, it's technically because of NATO, but we don't support Russia.
Well, yeah, I've seen a whole ton of that, and it's just like, no, absolutely not.
It's pathetic.
Hold the line. You know what I mean? Just, now is the time to it's going to be tough. You're going to be up against, a mob of people that are saying the opposite. But now is the time to show people that you are serious. Yes, bad things are happening. War is bad. But when the dust clears, we're going to find out. Look, we're already finding out about faked video, about how CNN has used videos from Libya and Syria and said that their video
from
of Ukraine.
Games.
Well, yeah. Did you see the one with the video, this Ghost of Kiev thing, where they're playing video game footage and claiming that it's some guy flying above Kiev, like shooting down Russian fighters and shit?
Right. And it's like all of these stories are falling apart. This Snake Island story of the heroic soldiers all of this is falling apart. Right. And if we hold the line and make clear that we take a firm position and we don't cower in the face of this, we will win people's respect. And it's not easy at times like this, but that is what we need to do if we want to be taken seriously. Because we're going to be validated. We always are. Anti-imperialists are always validated. Saddam Hussein wasn't ripping babies out of incubators.
That's exactly where I was going.
So I think the other really big thing to mention, you already mentioned it, was the families in the Donbass region leaving on buses and being separated and just trying to get out of that area. They're claiming that is Ukrainian people leaving Kiev. And it's verifiable because you have people from those regions that are actually getting on Twitter and saying, like, no, that's not what that is.
Yeah. And I mean, what's crazy is that they've monetized it, right? This is a little bit different than things used to be. It used to be like CNN, MSNBC would run footage or whatever. But now they've turned it into like, if you can find footage that you claim is from something and make it go viral, you can make money. And so there's a lot of just grifters on the internet that are looking for any footage they can find that feeds the narrative that US algorithms are pumping, right? Because we know that Silicon Valley is anything negative about Russia is just getting pumped forward in the algorithms. And so there's a lot of grifters that were just looking through the internet. It's like, oh, here's footage of something blowing up. I'll tweet it out and then I'll get my tweet like amped up and I can make more money. And it's kind of sad. And it kind of shows you how cynical a lot of this internet stuff really is, right? At the end of the day. But
I don't know what the fuck Ukraine looks like.
Yeah, exactly.
You could show me any kindergarten with a flame on it and I'd be like, oh, wow.
Oh no. The kindergarten is on fire.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there are kindergartens in Donetsk that have and Lugansk that have been blown up for 8 years, and U.S. media never talks about them. And that is one of the things that has always driven me crazy. Is that the USA, when they invaded Iraq, they killed hundreds of thousands of people, but we know CNN doesn't show us them. It doesn't interview their relatives crying about what happened. The USA has put sanctions on Venezuela that have caused people to be malnourished, but CNN doesn't interview those people and their families and show us what their life is like. This selective outrage where you're outraged about what U.S. imperialist media tells you to be outraged about. Some lives matter and some lives don't. It's really, really infuriating. And what bothers me is that a lot of people just kind of go along with it. There's a video somebody made where they actually made the analogy. They said what the U.S. imperialists are doing right now is kind of like arguing with somebody who's crying. If you're in a public place and you're having an argument with somebody and they start crying, you have to stop. Because no one is going to know anything about what the argument's about, but they're going to think, wow, you're arguing with somebody who's crying. They're crying. You're just so mean.
That is perfect.
It's literally a manifestation of borderline personality.
Yeah.
In countries.
It's not that Ukraine is George Floyd. It's that Ukraine is a BPD ho.
It's true because like somebody watching, I mean, if you watch it, it's just like Ukraine is crying. Oh, look, they're suffering. Oh my God. And you're disagreeing with them and they're suffering. It's like, yes, they're suffering. And the people of Donetsk and Lugansk have been suffering. And, the USA has been escalating this.
Analogy.
And then so that's just kind of the situation. So my encouragement is just tell people to look, it's tough, but dig your heels in. You know what I mean? And be ready to disagree with your friends and family about this. Don't like be happy, right? I occasionally I will see that from like people that are anti-imperialist. They're kind of in a battle high or whatever, and they're like, well, don't do that, right?
Yeah,
people are suffering.
No.
People are suffering.
Well, obviously, we don't love war,
right? But be empathetic, but just be clear about, look, the United States created this situation, and if we can be clear about that, when the dust clears and we start, finding out how many of these videos are faked and how much of this is falling apart, at the end of the day, we will be vindicated. Look, I've been to Crimea, Crimea, this region that joined with Russia. And, the narrative that we get is that this is a colony. Putin is colonizing Crimea. I've been there, like they have built the biggest bridge in Europe, and the amount of money and economic development that Russia has poured into Crimea. I mean, Crimeans are living way better than they were under Ukraine, and at the end of the day, like I walked through the streets of Crimea. I did not meet a single person who wasn't happy that they were part of the Russian Federation. And even there's one like ethnic minority, the Tatars, they were happy about it when I talked to them because, they have economically benefited from joining with Russia, an anti-imperialist country. So we're going to be vindicated like we always are. What they said about Gaddafi turned out to be not true during the Libyan war. A lot of the stuff they said about Syria turns out to be fake. We're going to be vindicated. But now is the time to hold the line, and do so in a convincing way. But to just be clear that that the main enemy of humanity is U.S. imperialism, is Wall Street, and that U.S. imperialism is not only destroying the lives of people all over the planet, it's destroying the lives of working families in the United States. Russia's not our enemy. China's not our enemy. Iran is not our enemy. Venezuela is not our enemy. Our enemy is the big banks and corporations that are dominating this planet and using their military to do so, and that it is in the interest of working people all over the world, including in the United States, to see capitalism dismantled.
Well,
thanks a whole lot for doing this. We always appreciate your time. We always enjoy the conversation. Everybody, please go on to Twitter, follow Caleb at Caleb Maupin. We're doing an event on March 12th with the Center for Political Innovation in Austin. Anybody who can be there, be there. We're really excited for that. And again, thank you very much, Caleb.
Thank you.
See you in Austin. Very good.
And that's it for Pact. Thanks again for watching or listening. I'm Peter. This is Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor. To help us out, click like, follow, subscribe, join our Discord, leave us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. To support us, become a patron at patreon.com/PactPod. That's PACDPOD. Thanks so much. Come back next week.